Koka sunarai sunarayenti. 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 Koka sunarai sunarayenti.
Hello, hi, welcome to this new episode of the Mango TV podcast. Today I'm very excited to have Ben De Loenen. Benjamin De Loenen studied audiovisual media and communication in the Netherlands, where he graduated with honors from his master's in his documentary Ibogaine-Rite of Passage, a film that remains an important reference on the subject matter. Benjamin has been dedicated to Indigenous Master Plants, the Indigenous community, and the challenge that come with the globalization of these practices since then. In 2009, he founded the International Center for Ethnobotanical Education, Research and Service, ICERS, a charitable non-profit organization with United Nations consultative status, where he serves as executive director. Benjamin is the author of several publications and films, has presented at conferences all around the world, and has participated in various leadership roles, including as a member of the board of directors of the Global Ibogaine Therapist Alliance. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, how did it all start? Your passion for this magical plant and wanting to help them, preserve them, protect them, facilitate the usage, facilitate the education. What was the cathartic moment?
I've the story that I always thought was really behind this, and then there's the one I started to discover along the way. So I'll maybe start with the official one that I always, thought looking back at my life. In 2001, I became a film student in Holland, and I just read a little article about Ibogaine, and it said that it has a great potential for the treatment of addiction. But that it's not recognized, it's stigmatized, and not the pharmaceutical industry is not interested, and that it comes from a tradition in Gabon of rites of passage. If that was true, then it looked to me like a good subject matter for my final exam project. And so I started to research, got heavily involved in the community, met Howard Lotsoff, who had discovered its anti-addictive properties, and he opened the door to centers, experts, and I really started meeting everyone. So I then really made the film. It took me all over the world. It took me to Gabon as well, where I for the first time saw an indigenous community, doing a rite of passage with Iboga, which was really an incredible experience.
The Bwiti.
The Bwiti, exactly. The incredible thing there was that for one person who needed an initiation, the whole community came together for 5 days to sustain that person through the process.
Yeah, we had Bruce Perry that told that story.
Yeah.
And the whole tribe basically hold him up in the air because he couldn't touch the ground, right?
Yeah, no, I was there as a filming, but at the same time, I was really there and it really, touched me. And since the beginning at that time, because there were these two completely opposite worlds, one was a medical subculture of highly stigmatized and discriminated people, far away from their families, often completely broken, no self-love, who then, were helping to, heal each other. Very often just alone on a bed, going through the experience and then going home and trying to manage to stay clean and to get their life on track. The other world was an indigenous world or a traditional world of the Bantu people. It was a collective process. It was something completely different. So at that time, I felt I was kind of internally wondering, like, where is the really Iboga, or what is the important piece here, and kind of trying to navigate these both worlds. So Iboga really connected me to these two completely different worlds, and I was kind of figuring out how do they connect. So that was very important. I made the film. I graduated, still worked for like 5 years as a professional film and documentary and television editor. But my heart was really with Iboga, no? And the more I presented my film, the more I kind of really, became an educator about the subject, the more I felt like I needed to abandon, my film career and go for Iboga.
So you also tried the medicine?
No, I just saw people going through the processes
Wow.
and saw the incredible transformation it generated. Then really what was a key part is that in 2006, a friend of mine came to a presentation I did with my film. He already knew the film, so I was surprised he came to a presentation, and he left me a book about ayahuasca. And on the front page it said, for your journey inside. And when I arrived home, I had an invitation to go to a ceremony with a Colombian Taita.
So at that point, when you got the book, you still hadn't
No.
tried Iboga?
No.
Oh, well.
No, this was in 2006, and so I thought, this is it. Let's do it. I was very scared. I was kind of, I didn't know what was going to happen, and then I ended up going, and it became like the most incredible lesson in surrender to life, to my fears, like kind of breaking through my fears. Every time as resistance was coming up, it was like, but letting go, and then as I let go, this most incredible feeling and openness to life. And so the next morning I called my mother, and I told her, like, I just did this ceremony, and this is the most incredible thing that I've experienced, and I need to do something with this. And at that moment it was clear to me that I needed to start a non-profit organization that really was dedicated to these plants.
Can I ask you, I can't get off my head, you made a movie about Iboga,
Yeah.
but then you preferred to do ayahuasca instead.
I didn't prefer, it came on my path. That's the way it happened.
When you were in Gabon, there was no opportunity?
No, because I was filming an initiation. Like, you can't do both things.
And you just surrendered?
And I spoke for, during 5 years, showing my film everywhere, talking about Ibogaine, but it was very much focused on Ibogaine and addiction. And then, and I started to basically, look at ways to get into this. And I started to develop ICEERS and the organization. Still editing, making a living from the editing, but it started to conflict more and more. But I was afraid to make the jump in the swimming pool because I didn't know how to swim. I didn't know how to lead a non-profit organization. I didn't have money. I didn't know how to fundraise. But my heart really, it felt really I need to do that. And that's when, in 2009, I went to an Ibogaine conference in Mexico. And some people in the community said, maybe now it's time for you to try it yourself and, have an experience. And so I agreed. And after the conference, it was a bit of a difficult moment because I just heard for 3 days about adverse events and heart issues and all of these, safety and then going to do it myself. So it was, a bit scary after 3 days of hearing that to then go into it. And it was a very hard experience, and like really for the first 12 hours, which was kind of all these kind of visions, cognitive things that came through. I went through a lot of fear, and after these 12 hours, I thought, like, what a horrible substance is this? This didn't do anything except for creating suffering. I just basically didn't feel it do anything constructive with me, but I just suffered basically for 12 hours trying to make sense of all of these images and concepts and things that came up. But then what I didn't know is that very differently from ayahuasca, then with the Iboga, this whole other phase opened, which is the kind of the second, the integration phase. But it's not like an integration after an experience; it's part of the experience. And that's when all of these concepts started to integrate and make sense and get kind of an emotional connection, because it was very disconnected from emotion, the experience itself. A lot of fear, but no, kind of, holding. I felt very alone, left alone in the experience. And so after the next 12 hours or so, that's when I was like, wow, this is the most incredible thing. some of the things it did to me. One was I was convinced I never wanted to have children. I already had my child, ICERs, and this was my path, and there was no space for a child. And then I realized I didn't want to lose the opportunity to have a father-child experience, because it was a lot about that. And then I didn't get a child immediately, but now I have a child. And then the other thing was, it immediately was clear I need to jump in the pool. And 1 month later, I left Amsterdam, where I was living, doing the editing, and I basically ended up in Barcelona by coincidence, and then started the working full time for ICERs. In the beginning, there was no funding, and then I started learning. It was a beginning of like a really big learning journey that's still ongoing, today. And
so I just want to make sure I understand correctly. The Iboga give you this message that you don't want children, but then you thought that
no, I always thought before that the kind of my life path didn't have space for children, and that changed in the Iboga experience.
Because Iboga showed you that this resistance was just a resistance to your relationship with your father, that was just a superficial blockage.
It pointed towards really, my relationship with my father, and kind of in general our relationship with our parents.
So you went behind
others.
that fear.
Yeah. Even though after the experience, still for 2 months and a half, I tried to figure out who I was. It was very hard, the integration, and I definitely after that changed the way I saw things as well, because I saw the delicacy of this as well. And I'm seeing this now, when people come in and they're like, we're going to build a big company, we're going to set up, 50 centers in a few years. That's not how it works at all. It is delicate, and it needs to, to really work within a responsible way is complicated.
With these master plans.
Yeah. That's one of the takeaways I got from it. And at the other side, there's an enormous potential that these plants hold, and if we work in the right way with it.
But so let's I want to unpack that a little bit, because it's interesting. So can you elaborate? Why do you think that when people come, this entrepreneur, they want to open 50 center of plant medicine, why do you think that there is almost a hidden agenda, right? How can you elaborate?
Not so much a hidden agenda. I think more it's people don't realize, the complexity of, these processes. And the language right now around the kind of the revolution in mental health and psychedelics is very much based on a logic that, you ingest a substance that's going to induce an experience, and then you're going to feel better and change your life, and it's going to have a huge therapeutic impact.
Instead?
And that's really kind of where then a business model is built on. Instead, this is not about an experience, this is about a process. And, and these experiences, can throw you into a process. And those processes can be really disruptive, and they need to properly be held. So, the focus is so much on the experience itself. You take this, you have this experience, and then wow, my
it's
PTSD.
The Western medicine approach.
It's very much like this quick short-term thinking. But the thing is that they kick off a process that if you take if you respond in the wrong way to the teachings, because maybe you didn't really understand them in the right way, or you didn't know how to sustain what just happened to you, what you experienced, then it can completely derail you as well, in a very challenging path, and you need to sustain afterwards.
Yeah.
It's a bit like labor.
Yeah.
You want a midwife,
Yeah.
but not only the labor is not only during the experience, it's afterwards, and the deeper the process, the more you might need, midwifing.
Yeah, with the difference that midwifing exists forever, and there is more knowledge. Whereas this Western shaman that speaks a Western psychoanalytical language, they're just starting to be formed now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not only it's a process and it's delicate, but the right. I drank ayahuasca for years in the in the Colombian cosmovision, which was beautiful, of Father Sun and Mother Moon, but nobody really was able to integrate my experience with my psychological history of childhood trauma and abandonment and disempowerment and a little bit it worked with Gabor when he partnered with the shaman in Yelapa in Mexico. But then, what I'm trying to say is that not just is not easy, but it's also difficult to find the skillful people that can uncover the subconscious. It's not conscious to you.
Yeah.
Imagine to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and there's a lot to unpack in that, no? Over the years, through ICEERS, the way we have worked is really, in the beginning, very much responding to what came to us. Like a legal case, we need help. We got a ceremony raided, like imagine, and, can you help us? And then we would, get involved, mobilize knowledge to, bring some sense and justice to these type of human rights violations. And then people started to know that we were doing this, and we got more requests. The other piece was we got more and more people asking us for help after experiences. And in 2013, we had Mark Ashala, who just now finished a book on integration, which I highly recommend. And we basically got him on board. He started to help people. And so we learned a lot about where things go wrong, kind of when people suffer, lack of preparation, the way experiences are held, all of the parts afterwards. And so, we got a pretty good idea about, what is kind of the underbelly of this world. And then, from everything we learned kind of dealing at the front lines was coming up with the needs of these communities. And obviously, we're in a cultural context that needs to learn really how to, handle these plants and these practices. So then we started to look at how can we proactively kind of engage to, foster ethics, safety, sustainability, like right relationship. Because, again, this thing of these two worlds, the indigenous world and then, kind of our kind of modern mentality, like, so, there's what I started to do, and this is how I see the last 20 years, is really navigate a lot of contradiction, and examine a lot of kind of also my own underlying assumptions and blind spots of, kind of how I at the beginning really saw the potential of these plants. The theory of change for me in the beginning was really like, wow, these plant substances can induce these incredible experiences and provide healing. And what's in the way is basically prejudice. And that leads to, a drug policy system of prohibition that doesn't get it and tries to repress. Stigma, bad press, all of these type of things. And then kind of as I start learning more, there was also something about, wow, we actually have a community that needs to come together, become accountable, elevate the ethics and safety of the practices. That's kind of what I started to see. And then kind of, and then it became more like navigating, like a lot of things, ways to talk about these plants and working with them in our world don't actually make any sense to people, indigenous spiritual leaders. And then, I had to learn kind of why is that? And it was kind of all it's like the way I see it now, plant medicine really are the nexus of different ways of life, of different ontologies, of different worldviews. And it actually brings them all together. And where they clash or, create tension, that's where I think the real opportunity for learning lies. More than just saying, like, we need to make this available to millions of people. That logic makes sense for psychedelics, MDMA, so forth. That makes more sense because there's no cultural history. It kind of, is a substance that can, help people, cope with their lives in a better way, in a more whole way. But I really, for the last 4 years in particular, really have started to see. I was very blind to the high sophistication of these traditional systems, understanding of healing, understanding of life, and some of the issues actually of the underlying assumptions of biomedicine. I've become highly skeptic of now, and I think it's actually wrong to take traditional plants and then integrate them in a biomedical framework, because these are very opposing systems in terms of how they understand health and healing.
Okay, so this is interesting. I just would like to let's stay with the chronology of IC years, and maybe we can see if we can, intertwine with your personal evolution. So IC years 1.0 was responding to the demand. So this plant was still illegal, so people were asking for legal help. So you coordinated with lawyer and start lobbying with the judge and helping. You created a defense fund. Then you had people reaching out because they were not supported properly for the integration. They didn't have the ontological tool to integrate these new teachings. So that was ICER 1.0.
Yeah, and as well as we, Jose Carlos Bozo came on board. He's a pioneer in terms of.
Who wrote the book?
No, this is our scientific director. He's been a pioneer. Actually, conducted with MAPS the first ever MDMA and PTSD study for women who with sexual abuse in Madrid, and that was then politically blocked at some point, which was incredible that happened. And so he was part of a research team in Barcelona with Jordi Riba, who's done many years of kind of academic research into safety and therapeutic potential of ayahuasca. So he came on board, and we started to be involved, or we were involved pretty early on in research as well. No, it was like we need evidence, and we need to make that also practically available in court cases or in advocacy, policy work. So we did that. We had Oscar Pares, who worked, with the Catalan health authorities in harm reduction and, the kind of the regulation model for the cannabis social clubs, which is a very interesting model, which I think is very relevant today. So he came on board. We engaged with the health authorities, did a conference on Ibogaine actually in 2010 at the health ministry in Catalonia. So that's kind of, but we were advancing our knowledge through research. We were making it available, to stop this wave of arrests that really started in 2010. And we were kind of responding, to the community. Then at some point, kind of in 2014, we really saw that we needed to organize a conference on ayahuasca and bring the drug policy and ayahuasca community together. Because the arrests were going up, there was a lot of human rights violations, and that was kind of that was here in Ibiza.
I remember.
Yeah, that was a real kind of turning point for us. We got for the first time also people really behind us. They saw the work that we were doing, and that really helped us also kind of expand our team and get experts on board in different areas. Constanza Sanchez got on board. She's a expert in international policy, UN, law. So kind of all of these things happened around that time. That was quite an experience here in Ibiza. And then things kind of evolved. We ended up bringing the conference to Rio Branco, it's kind of the home of the ayahuasca churches and a lot of indigenous peoples. That was a hard conference, it was 6 days.
Which year was that? 2016?
2016. Yeah, that was very very hard.
Because there was the colonization
and
energies.
And we, how do you bring a dialogue? Our goal was to bring the international dialogue around, the globalization to that type of more traditional context where there's a very long history. There's about 100 years of history for Santo Daime. Kind of these churches have existed since then. and then kind of to a context with a lot of indigenous peoples, like how do you bring a dialogue there, connecting about the globalization. And so there was a lot of kind of conflict coming up and tension, and we navigated the way we could, and I definitely learned a lot. It was maybe till that the biggest learning experience.
Because the local felt threatened. They felt like already you came 500 years ago.
Well, that's part of it. There was also kind of conflict among communities there that came up, which was difficult. And then also kind of when you don't really know a terrain very well, you make mistakes as well. No, it's kind of the codes, the way you organize things, the relationships. So a lot came out of it. Let's say it's that was definitely an experience that made me grow and understand the complexity of this. It's kind of the clash between worlds, and all of the tensions and how things are understood. That was kind of that beginning, and from there on, like 2017, that's when we started to build kind of deeper alliances with indigenous leaders. One organization is called UMIAC, the Union of Indigenous Yagé Medics of the Colombian Amazon. And I started to learn a lot, like really a lot, like what this is about for indigenous people. And I kind of got a glimpse of that in the beginning when I went with the Taita that gave me my first cup of Yagé to his territory in 2007. I saw that their territories were, glyphosate was sprayed just like a month before I arrived there on top of the village, kind of for coca eradication, on the Maloca, which was abandoned. And I mean, when they sprayed it, there were kids playing. That just happened. Rivers with oil contamination from the extraction and violence. I met like children who just had lost their both parents from the violence. And, I realized, and I could really start learning much more when we engaged with UMIAC about that is what Yagé, ayahuasca, and indigenous spirituality is about. It's about the territory in first place. The protection and kind of the spiritual protection of the territory by maintaining it aligned with the order of nature. And the territory is not something that is separate from the community or from the individuals or from the ancestry or from the knowledge or from the cultural identity. It's all one. It's all one integrated kind of body. And they work to harmonize, protect, heal, those, their communities. That's really what it's about.
It's very well said. And maybe I'm going to try to repeat it because it is so important. So you're saying that this particular tribe in Ecuador, for them the ayahuasca was like a way to integrate all these different concepts of land, territory, belonging, community, ancestry, very localized in the most harmonious way.
Yeah, exactly. And this is needed to be protected. That's the kind of violence in response to violence. It's really about the spirituality. So spirituality and the ayahuasca, yagé, and these traditional plants are the pillars, the keystone medicines for indigenous spirituality, and they are the frontline defense of the territories and the indigenous way of life. And therefore, like, the leaders in these communities are spiritual leaders. They're not political leaders. Political leaders are accountable and work, and this is in kind of communities that have maintained their way of life. There's a lot of communities that were so fractured that they were displaced, moved to cities, and there was a lot lost, in those contexts. So they say that when an indigenous community loses its territory, when it's displaced, it's the loss of their identity. Like, slowly, that's really the degeneration and the loss of the indigenous identity, because it's kind of losing, the pillar or the fundament of who you are.
Yeah, like an animal in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and it's like, the territory is really where everything is rooted in, integrated in. So when it's kind of ripping your head of your body, you're not grounded. Like you can't live like that. You become confused. And so we spend hours on Zoom, with the people. And for me, the beautiful thing about that relationship was that, we were approached because they wanted to learn more about how to become autonomous, like an autonomous organization, getting support from the international community, because as you know, like right now, most of the funding and focus is on biomedicalization of psychedelics and kind of plant medicine. Even like ceremonial uses are kind of a bit on the side. And even like the criminalization of ceremonial practices going up. It's increased a lot over the last two years, while biomedicalization is happening. So and then kind of where is the support to the indigenous people? It's practically non-existent in the psychedelic space. So they really reached out, like, how can we do that from all of your experience with ICEERs? And I had to learn it from scratch, jumping in the pool. So I was sharing all of that, and I'm not a big expert in fundraising. We're a small organization with always with a limited budget, struggling to get to the end of the year. But what I learned, we were sharing, and it was helping them strengthen as an organization. We became like really close allies, and they were in return really explaining what this was about. And you have to imagine, like, you have on the other side of the Zoom people who then have like spiritual leaders being killed, violence, threats, extraction in their community. Like these are people with very urgent needs. It's not like, oh, let's do something beautiful together and we talk, again next week or next month. These are people with needs for survival. And so it was really like there was this tension always between the urgent needs and then what are we building together. So during the Zoom calls, I started to learn a lot about the way they think, what Yahé is, what spirituality is, the territories, all of these things. We were kind of strengthening each other by sharing.
But they were under threat by the oil company and the chemical company, the extraction industry.
The armed conflict, even though there were peace accords, is ongoing. There's so many interests because they're like living on oil and minerals and all of these things. The cocaine industry, basically, with the cartels, like it's all kind of happening in those regions. So. Then we did some kind of really concrete actions together. One was going to the United Nations because we have United Nations consultative status. We have the capability of opening the door for voices to be elevated there. So we went to the human rights bodies in Geneva when the Colombian government was being examined, in terms of how they were doing on human rights. And the leaders of UMIAC were managed to get recommendations in that were adopted. But then the question is, like, does the Colombian government really do anything with it or not? I think now there's more hope that that's possible than with the previous leadership. And then 2019 was a big moment for us because we organized our last conference in Girona here in Spain. And that was really, it felt to me really like a coming together. The title was a bit, the inner search for a better world. And our kind of the message we tried to convey to the audience was that, because ayahuasca is very often really thought about as like personal individual health and well-being and how I can become a better person. That's really how people approach it, and how it got famous. And it was like, okay, but this is also about community. It's about person, community, and territory, and the environment. And so we invited people who were working in Amazon defense and community, all kinds of people that came together, and so much came out, and it felt a bit like we are coming together as one very diverse community, but really for the same purpose, and that is collective. It's not just like me. And we had an indigenous autonomous space. We also learned from some of the things we didn't do in the right way in Brazil. That really was important. And then right after we went finally to Colombia with UMIAC to visit territories, and that's when I really started to have experiences that that changed my life in ways all of the past hadn't gotten to. That was kind of the summer of 2019. Things really started to change for me. And in the meantime, we had learned so much from all of the work and, being involved with so many communities, from drug policy, like UN, government, all the way down to like the grassroots and, from the indigenous world to the psychedelic space, being in kind of a liminal space between worlds and learning really about all of them and the inconsistencies, and then always trying, this is really embedded in the commitments of ICEERS, is like challenging, the way things are, the status quo, and always starting to think, ahead of the curve and foresee when challenges can become harm, and how to, it's kind of a collective midwiving, One of the other things I really start seeing is that it's not so much about the substance, it's about the relationships, the plants and the process of globalization brings worlds together, and it's about weaving a tapestry of knowledge and collective impact, and that's really what I feel we've been kind of midwiving. I have to add also one thing I haven't mentioned, that one of the through the legal defense and seeing the things that were going wrong, about 6 years ago, this actually started here in Ibiza. You were in the conversation. We started to think about how can we more proactively, engage or seed processes where the community comes together, builds trust, builds alliance, holds each other accountable, learn from each other's mistakes, from each other's knowledge, and kind of build a path of self-regulation.
It was a Dandelion project.
Yeah, exactly. This is what Jerónimo Mazaraza was also here in Ibiza has been leading. And this has been really about, it's kind of a bit of a pollinator process, engaging with the community, and kind of they start to see the value of why we need to get together, because these are stigmatized communities. And because they're stigmatized, they can't really come together openly. They can't really learn. It's when like cultural practices are new and we don't really know well how to hold them. If you then keep people isolated, there's no learning process and actually kind of a natural way of learning how to, constructively integrate them. And so we started to see these type of processes and accompany people, and that's really has been a bit of a movement that's building. And we learned, we asked some of the, Jerónimo did interviews with some of these other movements, like the Chinese medicine practitioners in California, who all recognized if this is not properly handled, it's dangerous. But there's a great potential. People should have the right to, practice. And then what if we come together and we self-regulate? We decide on what ethics we uphold, on how, what are kind of our minimum safety standards and so forth. And we learn, and we ask those collective, what would you do differently if you would go back to the beginning? So we learn from their mistakes as well. And then, there's been this weaving of a web of kind of like a hybrid community, as Bill Melton, an American change maker, says. Local communities, they're rooted in local community because every culture and local context is different. They come together, they kind of get on the same page with all of their respecting diversity, because ayahuasca has very diverse practices and plant medicine in general. And they start working together towards kind of a common vision for the future, collective strategies, and then kind of rooted in those organized communities, you start to implement more like harm reduction strategies, things like how to, like a support net for people who fall through and actually have problems after ceremony. That's one thing. And this is what now we have a course for, and so it's kind of building really, instead of just kind of putting structures in place that control, it's about really sustaining the grassroots. These are more grassroots movements, which I think are lacking also in the current kind of psychedelics movement, and there's some of it building now, but we've been kind of working on this for 6 years.
No, this is very interesting. But so, do you mind expanding a little bit on you were saying that the clash of the two worlds and the biomedicalization of this plant might not be the exact model to use this plant. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's this is going into the weeds a bit of kind of the indigenous worldviews and how these systems work.
Yeah, but those are interesting. Those weeds.
Yeah. These are interesting ones.
Because just to say, Mango TV listener, they know a little bit more about this plant, but the common people, if you ask billions of people, the only thing they know about psychedelic is that you're going to be able to be covered by the insurance, you're going to be able to do it in a clinical setting. They don't know anything else.
Yeah.
So it's important.
And don't get me wrong, this is not about like criticizing the psychedelic biomedicalization, because I think if it's properly implemented, and there's still a way to go, but there's kind of good people really thinking and figuring out how to do that. It's gonna alleviate suffering of many people. But calling it a revolution in mental health, that's not what it is to me.
Okay.
It is a revolution
Tell
in
us more.
psychiatry, maybe, because psychiatry hasn't had any new medications and approaches for the last 50 years. So it's definitely a disruption of the psychiatric space, and it is gonna alleviate the suffering of many people. So that's fantastic, and that's really important at these times when the meaning of life is kind of collapsing. As we have all of these crises. And even the future of life is uncertain to us. No, there's a lot of fear, and people are lost and suffering. So that's really now coming in place in this moment. But the revolution in mental health really lies in how we understand health. And I've seen in the indigenous world a completely different understanding of health and life itself. And so still, biomedicalization is very much in the sphere of sick care, not in the realm of health care. First of all, it understands health as an individual issue. And even like your mind is separate from your body. You go to like different specialists and doctors and kind of more for like mechanical things. That's really great. Like open heart surgery, incredible. Like there's an incredible sophistication in the allopathic medicine. But kind of for chronic diseases, for mental health diseases, it's all symptom reduction. And we know that. That's why we are looking for root cause healing. But I don't believe that psychedelics in that context can cause root cause healing. They can definitely peel off layers and give people freedom, but there's a limitation to that, and that's because of the very underlying assumptions of the field. It thinks of symptoms as bad, as something wrong. There is something broken in you. There's something wrong. Your life is going wrong, and we need to fix you. And there are substances that are going to help you fix what you have. That's the framing. That and that's not at all the way healing works in the indigenous world. And the way, first of all, the systems there are based on ontologies on worldviews where, as I said, the individual, the community, and the territory and the world are one. They're different materializations of the same underlying, let's call it energetic or spiritual architecture. So those systems are focused on that underlying energetic and spiritual architecture. And if you don't see those layers, it's impossible to diagnose what's going on. So we start to make sense of symptoms, but we do it through a lens that is these incredible blinders around it. We only see matter. And I'm kind of oversimplifying a bit, no? But because we also think about transgenerational trauma and epigenetics, and all of that knowledge is really incredible. But it's still very kind of in the physical space. You have kind of these things in your body, and So we try to do diagnostics only of a very partial view of the whole, kind of dimension of who you are.
Yeah. It's not in a holistic system. It's very
Exactly.
specific about
It's
depression,
not integral.
PTSD,
It's not integral.
Yeah.
You are one. Then there's a community. There's there's environment. And we have a ministry of public or mental or health. And then you have mental health in there. We have a ministry of environment.
Agriculture.
Somewhere else, other funders, other organizations trying to diagnose and figure out what to do about it. There's then public health, completely separate. That to indigenous peoples is a complete fracture of our understanding of health and life. So it's the way these systems are designed. That's what we have to look at. And these are fractured systems. So they are actually a reflection, and the world is a reflection of our fractured ontology, our fractured understanding of the world, of life, and of health. And so I really started to learn way more about these systems when I start working with in the Shipibo, with Shipibo healing. First only with ayahuasca and then dietas, and then with other systems and spiritual leaders. And kind of in those systems, Shipibo system is very much of a surgery system. I call it this kind of energetic surgery. And the fascinating thing is that the healers are not actually doing the surgery. They're just conduits for the master plants that they have dieted, that they are in relationship with, in a collaborative relationship. It's like a medical team. You have your anesthesiologist, you have your nurse, your specialist. They're kind of all together there. But these are plants, and kind of plant spirits, as they say, working together with the healer, guiding on diagnosing, seeing what's going on, and then working, through them. And then in kind of the dietas, establishing a direct relationship to the patient, to heal and teach. So when I started to embark on that journey, that completely shifted my life. So what they say or see is that we have an energetic body, and I'm not an expert, I'm not a trained healer or anything. I just can speak from my own experience and going through this. But we have an energetic body, and that is kind of built of our ideas, of our views of ourselves, of who we are, our fears, our judgments, kind of all of these negative emotions and thoughts. We kind of integrate them in who we are, and that actually fractures us. So when something really traumatic happens to you, and you kind of can't give that a meaning. This was not supposed to happen. It hurt, and there's something wrong. That when you think that, or you think there's something wrong with you, you automatically think there's something wrong with life. Because that's just, you can't separate both. No, something that happened to me in life that was not supposed to happen. So life is wrong. Life is not the way it's supposed to be. So when that happens, you start to kind of fracture pieces of your ontology, which becomes less holistic. It becomes less integral. You kind of isolate more and more, and you have these ideas about yourself. And so these are really at the core of your energetic body. These are kind of like blockages, energetic blockages in your energetic body. They kind of root. In the beginning, it's a fear of wrong. Like, oh no, is there something wrong about my life? Oh no, this happened. And it becomes like a deep knowing of wrong. Yeah. Life is wrong. This is not supposed to be. I can't trust life. I can't embrace life. I'm afraid of it. I feel threatened. You become isolated, more and more isolated from, the world, from life itself.
Yeah, yeah. Gabor calls them spiritual injury.
Exactly, like spiritual injury.
Neurological injury.
Yeah.
That usually for Gabor is associated to the loss of authenticity and internalizing of unworthiness. So it's like a little injury in your neurology.
Yeah, and so there's that really starts growing as a seed and rooting in your energetic body. Yeah. And then if you don't take those seeds out, they root very strongly, and they grow and they become physical. No, So
like what happened with the cartilage. Like, I twist my ankle, and so the body build this hard cartilage around it to like protect it.
mhm.
And I feel that this spiritual injury, then they grow because subconsciously they put you in situation that reinforce that belief. So you go into the destructive relationship, and you end up recreating that injury.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's very well said. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're not enough, but these are all kind of with trauma, the event, it's kind of pretty clear where injury happens.
Sometimes.
But often it's kind of very unconscious, and
they call it subtle
yeah,
trauma.
it's like disempowering views that
Yes.
come because we think something that happened in our life was not supposed to be, and so there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. Also, when your parents get distracted, rather than just saying, "Oh, they were busy," you think they don't love me.
Yeah.
I'm not lovable.
Exactly. Well, and so I discovered that actually I started at ICEERS. I mean, this whole path because I convinced myself 20 years before that I was a fuck up. And so this whole road was a road of compensation. It's like if I'm actually a fuck up, I'm gonna then show that I'm not a fuck up because I can't believe, because I don't want to accept that there's something wrong about life. I want to trust it, but actually deep down you don't. So kind of what the healers do is that the symptoms actually are pointing to what's going on underneath, and what needs to be, what the injuries in your ontology, the fractures in your ontology. And there's taproots. But now the fascinating thing to me is that they are all kind of connected to the taproots that go back in our ancestry. So very often explaining, this is what I've learned, explaining what happens to someone, only looking at the current life versus like our life, and then our parents' life, and our grandparents' life, and then all the way back, in our bloodline. If you don't take into account that perspective, you might not be able to explain at all why somebody is depressed or why somebody is struggling. So I think there's an issue also with this focus on looking at, there must be a trauma in your life, because there's always disempowering views and things that happen which are you didn't fully integrate in your life, but the way what you tell yourself about what happened in your life already is predetermined kind of by the lens you see life through, and that lens comes from the ancestral imprint in your energetic body. And so when a child is born, it carries parts of the imprint. It kind of sustains unresolved issues from the ancestry in their imprint, and as they grow it becomes stronger. And that's why sometimes things appear, mental health issues, struggles, physical, 3 generations of cancer, and then we're kind of looking at where does all of that come from, what did you do in your life? But maybe that's really coming from the ancestry. And now, why is that important? Because it is what I've come to believe, through that whole experience, is that it is our role, like our real job here, is to take on, and we can't avoid it, the unresolved struggles, from our ancestry, and make them whole again. Kind of, we are born already with a fractured physical, energetic body, and we want to put it together because that's the way kind of the ancestry unites, and that's how we are weaving back together our fractured worldview. So when somebody is depressed, you can't see where it's kind of coming from, and then you're kind of is there like a physical imbalance? And we talk about major depression, we talk about all kinds of labels of mental health. In those systems, there's no labels. There are only names for kind of the types of energies, that kind of in the energetic body that are causing these life struggles.
Do you remember the name of those energies?
No, I mean, it's a whole world. That's a conversation to have with traditional healers. But there's no concept of labeling, and kind of. I think that when you label, or you are saying you're coming into a system that says there is something wrong with you, we need to fix you. That maybe it's not recognizing that you are doing exactly the role that you have in life, which is working. That you're actually doing an incredible job. It's just such a heavy job. It's like having 20 jobs at the same time, because you are carrying all of this ancestral weight on you, that you are trying to, kind of make whole again and let go, so that you actually liberate the next generations from the imprint that has been passed on from these generations. And so you're doing that job. At the same time, you have your day job, and then maybe you have another one, and maybe you have a family, and then you're like, oh, yeah, but you're depressed, and you're not doing enough, and then people even are judging you, saying you are not handling your life well. But when you see the full thing of what's going on, maybe you're saying, oh my God, like, how are you managing to sustain this? And there's kind of no recognition of, there's kind of a deep belief of wrong, that life goes wrong in that system, instead of that maybe, and this is one of the things that for me I learned that was so helpful from the Shipibo system, they talk about pruebas. So kind of a way to think about it, say your energetic body has blockages, energetic blockages, because there's fractures, and so when there's a fracture, the energy can't flow through. That materializes in your body. And so kind of the disalignment of your energetic body now is materialized in your physical body. So your physical body is disaligned, there's fractures, and so the life energy doesn't flow well through it. And that's what creates physical problems. But then the other thing which happens is the way you relate to the world, because your worldview, your ontology is kind of written in your energetic body, which is kind of connected to the mind, it's kind of in that realm. Then the world you create, that you're a source of, is going to be disaligned. So you're going to struggle. Things just don't flow, that feeling when things are really difficult and they don't flow. So there's a disalignment inside in your body, your first territory, and then your physical body, and then in your family, and then in your in kind of the world around you, as well as in your ancestry. That's really where it comes from. That's the taproot. And so what then the healers do is, through the Icaros, they're scanning. It's really kind of the master plants doing it through them, to find kind of these blockages, but they can only see the surface. And then it's kind of like opening the surface, but you don't know what's inside, and you don't know where the roots are leading, but they're leading all the way to the ancestry. So there's kind of a process of midwifing the healing, where you kind of go layer by layer, and you take out some, but not too much, because if not, it would be really unhandleable, and you would get crazy. And then when your energetic body gets cleared, part of it, then you realign. It's like, okay, there's now space here, you realign, and then energy flows again. After that, there's a whole time that it takes to have your physical body realigned with your energetic body, but also your environment, the way your relationships need to realign with this new alignment. And that's done through pruebas, tests. Because if you just only have an experience, then it's just an experience. You might have some new insights, but then, people, this is when you kind of fall back into old patterns. But when kind of this is done in a deep surgical way, and, from the beginning to the end, fully, there's the alignment, there's the protection, and then you kind of go in the world, pruebas will come up, tests will come up in life that are going to challenge the pieces that you have inside to, kind of for this alignment process to evolve, so that you make new decisions, you handle with them in a new way, kind of what you have learned, what your new energetic body, your ontology is capable of, you now kind of are living out in the world, and it starts to change your relationship, what you have built. So to me, this feel in this process, like sometimes I look back at ice years and I thought, well, this is the old me with the old thinking and the old understanding of life that is created at, and it doesn't feel aligned anymore. So during the pandemic, we went through a whole realignment process. I started to see, new possibilities and misguided analysis of what needed to be done in my strategic thinking before. And that's really why deep healing is very hard, because everything starts to shift and you need to hold it. And it takes time. So I've gone now through like a 4-year process like that. And what I've come to understand just now, a few months ago, when I got to the taproot of this whole ancestral lineage, is that it all comes from the fear of wrong and the fear of death. This kind of the fear that life is wrong, and so that we cannot trust life. And so when you have systems built, and what we do then is, when life is wrong, when life, we look at our past, it didn't go the way it was supposed to be. Here we are. We can't accept what's going on right now because it's really, there's so much suffering going on. Then we want to change that because, but we want, instead, we maybe need to change our way of thinking about our ontology. It's an ontological crisis we're in, and the judgment is really at the core of everything. I mean, look at the drug policy system. It judges people. It's like, ayahuasca people, practitioners are in jail right now because they think they are wrong. They are the ones that are causing the crisis that we're in right now. And then it's really becomes about controlling life. If you don't trust life because life has gone wrong, you want to control it. And that's what very much of our biomedical system is about, is controlling symptoms. But that's not healing. That's controlling disease. That's what I'm saying. It's more like it's in the realm of sick care. Instead of kind of knowing on how to sustain a process where these symptoms can be resolved, untangled, is the entanglement of, kind of knots in our ontology. These are kind of what I now see as the root of disease. But they have a purpose. They're not something wrong. They have a purpose. We just think they're wrong, and that we need to, control. We need to fight it. We're in a fight with life. We're not we're not in, what I say, like, moment where we say, where we allow life, to go through it and understand what's going on, so that we don't resist the process. This is the key to overcoming the pruebas. As the moment you start to fight what's going on, that's when the prueba grows and grows and grows until you can't fight it anymore. And then there's kind of a breakthrough, and you see how you are actually fighting life and fighting yourself.
Yeah. I mean, this is super interesting. Let me see if I can, because it's complicated. It has to do with how a worldview, this idea of feeling separate, the secular materialistic view that consciousness comes from the brain, this materialistic view of the universe like a gigantic clock, this object-subject duality you have been explaining, it's difficult to reconcile with the indigenous view of ancestral healing. in the secular materialistic view that consciousness is created by the brain, and when the brain dies, consciousness dies. There is no connection with the ancestry. And so if our Western biomedical model is based on a secular view of the universe, it might not work so well. It's complicated, and you should write a little book about that. But so you said that in the Shipibo worldview, they don't label these psychological knots or disturbance. They have different word for the energies, for these different energies.
Yeah, it's not. They don't pathologize. It's not like this is what you have a label and then there's a manual and then these are the drugs or the plants that
They don't pathologize it, but they
yeah,
they
I
have
mean,
different words.
I mean, they have definitely in their worldview. There's definitely right and wrong, and you know you know, kind of there is disease, and then you know that needs to be healed. That's part of the way they work.
But where do they think this disease come from?
Well, that's the thing. It goes all the way back to your ancestry.
How many generations down the line?
I mean, all the way to the source of your bloodline.
Family.
But you know, and you know, I've been working with some different systems and healers, not only Shipibo. You know, but so again, I'm talking about my experience of having gone through a family healing process where my whole family got thrown into this. You know, when you get into the ancestral roots, it rocks the whole system. You know, so but you know, we don't recognize. Like, I think one of the things which is really problematic is that we are actually thinking that evidence is kind of biomedical evidence only, and then at the top of the hierarchy, and with ICERS we are doing work at the UN about this. You know, evidence-based policy is only based on one type of evidence, and that is you know, in the field of health, it's biomedical evidence, and at the top of the hierarchy there is clinical trials. That's kind of really the only evidence that is taken as valid, you know, the drug development. But we, you know, when we think about indigenous knowledge, indigenous ancestral knowledge, the traditional systems, we don't even recognize it as knowledge systems. You know, and sciences, evidence is completely excluded. These are cultural beliefs. You know, spirituality is kind of a cultural belief. So they are not even recognized as systems. We only have our system, and our system is only based on an understanding of a physical body, but you know, and then very much of an individual physical body, not connected to our larger you know, world that we live in and engage with in communities and families to a certain extent. You know, there's kind of epigenetics, but we don't see an energetic body, so we think it's kind of belief, and our diagnoses are only based on that. You know, that's, I think, where, and so you have these systems that understand the health in a very integral way. From the ancestry, you know, energetic body. There's, you know, it's a conversation to have with you know, spiritual leaders or healers. Yeah. But it's a very complex system. Yeah. And we want to be a movement of healing, but we don't even recognize these healing systems. And ancestral knowledge is really, it holds the memory of who we are, of life itself, because of an ongoing deep relationship with life that is established through an alliance with plants, with master plants or otherwise. You know, so for me, you know, there's really an understanding of healing in those systems that goes far beyond like symptom reduction. It's really understanding the systems and then looking at where they come from, the deeper layers of life, understanding, you know, why they are happening, and then kind of, you know, weaving things back together so they become whole again.
And in that model, the environment and the community plays a key role.
Well, in the territory, that's why, you know, the Shipibo have lost a lot of this connection to territory because they were very impacted by colonialism. You know, in Colombia, there's a lot of that is really. You know, the territory is what holds the knowledge, and so it's all about keeping the territory whole. And so the ontology needs to be that we are, you know, that is our body. Our territory is our body, literally. You know, it's just manifested and experienced in different layers. But
the territory is the frame for the community.
It's the body, but you know, it's not just we live on top of it. It's who we are. it's who we are. But then there's layers to it, so they're inseparable. The fact that they are separated, that in itself is a symptom of fracture. And then why did that happen? And then that goes back to ancestry and so forth, and kind of forces of life. So that's why and I think this brings us to like the current moment of what is really happening in the psychedelic space, and what do we need to be really mindful of, is very much that we are not a harming movement, that we actually don't make the problem worse, because now, the as I said, ayahuasca, for example, is the pillar of indigenous spirituality and the defense of the territory. So when we start, manipulating that, when we say, okay, we want that because we need it, and we're gonna now drug develop it, we're gonna biomedicalize it, we're gonna commercialize it, and now it's gonna be all over the news. This is the great psychedelic drug, and then that comes back to the communities, and then the young people who are, were told by the elders that this is a sentient living being. You need to learn how to be in right relationship with. There's cultural codes on how to do that. It's a long life path of sacrifice to be a servant, and then there's kind of this whole other idea coming back. We can be having unintended consequences of major scale if we don't behave as a community, as a psychedelic community, on the communities, and that would be the antithesis of like what this is about. It's about a healing movement, a movement for life. At least that's what it is to me. So we cannot. There's this concept of acción sin daño, do no harm, and right relationship. And I think, and this brings me back to my change in when I started was, wow, these substances have this great potential, and I still think that, and the plants have great potential, but it's really about right relationship. How can we be in right relationship with ourselves, with our communities, with our territories, with the other, and with these plants? And that is really what this globalization is about to me. And it's really, when this encounter of these different worlds creates tensions, that's where we need to pay the attention and say, okay, wait. And there's several conflicts around this, with the decree movement in the US, and there's companies now announcing their drug developing plans. That's when the right thing to do is say, whoa, okay, we think we need this, and we're going to make this available to millions of people. Let's wait for a moment. What would be the intended consequence of doing that? If this is about traditional plants, we have to do prior free and informed consent, because we are potentially endangering the survival of the very people who understand healing and life at the deep way.
How so?
Because of what I just shared, these are healing systems that understand life.
But why are they endangered if we replicate them in the lab for the West?
This is what I'm saying. Like, imagine, your grandfather has told you since you were young, we have these allies that are part of our territory, of our cultural identity, of our ancestral knowledge given to us by our territory. And there's a way to be in right relationship to that. You have to do dietas, you have to restrict, sexual activity, certain foods, you need to be in isolation for a long time. This is the way you need to, heal yourself, blah, blah. This is what you need to do to be in relationship to this living being, which is an ally and a pillar of our way of life. And you're learning that, for generations. That's been the teachings, the oral traditions. This is how you are in relationship. And then there's big news, people listen to because our media arrives there, and and then it's like, hey, but wait a minute, my grandfather said this, but they're saying this is a psychedelic substance. You can give it in a hospital. Just it's a substance. It's not a life. And so it's endangering the fact that. And then
the culture.
Yeah, and that's one layer of it. There's a in the way indigenous people see, there's a spiritual layer to it as well, where there's a disruption of these systems. and that's just one. Then there's the ecological impact. If we're gonna extract this might turn into another extractive industry. No free, prior, and informed consent. So this is really, I think, like where for me, doing this work, getting really working deeply, through my own healing and my family healing and learning with these in these different systems, that is really what I've come to see. And at some point, I was like, okay, I want to. It needs to become our priority to make sure that indigenous peoples and communities have what they need to have their territories protected and repaired, and to thrive as a culture. Because only that is kind of the start of of right relationship. And that's when we can say, okay, we are somewhat lost. We're in this crisis. We don't know what to do. Technology doesn't seem to get out of it. Can you help us lead this? Tell us what to do. What are you seeing? But this is not what we're doing. At the same, in the meantime, we're extracting things from there. They're under threat of extermination. Many of these cultures, and luckily, this is now. It seems that it's starting to shift a little. With Lula in Brazil, in Colombia, there's some hope with Petro. There was an Arhuaco woman now part of the UN. These are the type of leadership positions that spiritual leaders or representatives for them can hold. And but we are not asking what should we do. We're going to say, we're going to do this. Are you on board or not? And if you don't, we're going to look for the next one. That's kind of very much because we just think we have everything, that our mind and our intelligence really understands things. And this has been the biggest gift of this 20-year journey for me, was these moments where you look back and you're like, fuck, what an idiot. I thought I understood everything. I was certain. And actually, now I understand that I didn't have an idea because I couldn't see the deeper layers of our body, And one of the peoples that has really fascinated me, I have a relationship I've started a few years ago with a spiritual leader, a mama from the Sierra Nevada, from the Arhuaco people. They're like the Chinese medicine practitioners of the world. They see one life, and the body is Mother Earth, and there's an order to it which is written in nature, and because we think there's something wrong about life, in essence, we can't trust it. We have taken over control. We think we know better, and we start to build things, and the development. What they're saying is the development has to be the development of the thought to always know how to sustain life. Because life evolves, so your thought needs to develop. That's development. It's not kind of building more and more, stuff on top that creates a disbalance in the order of life. And so, their science is really, tapping into the consciousness of the Big Mother, kind of the universal mind,
the great mind, yeah,
and and then getting so that their mind becomes an embodiment of that. It's embodied knowledge. This is also the other key piece that I've learned. We think of knowledge as something you can get by reading or acquire. This is intellectual knowledge, but ancestral knowledge, or they say sabiduría ancestral, ancestral wisdom, traditional knowledge, is embodied knowledge, and it's really embodying the kind of the information of life itself through plants, through relationship to animals, to the relationship with territories or with the world as a whole. So that what is guiding you is life itself, not your mind that thinks it knows better. So it's kind of, again, the fracture between our mind and the big mind, makes it that we are, doing stuff that just creates disbalance. When they are talking about, what needs to be done, Mama told me the droughts come from the fact that we are taking water, and that every element, every animal, everything on this world is a point of origin. These are kind of energetic points, like let's say Chinese medicine, there's energetic points and meridians, and everything is energetically connected. So they understand all of these connections, and so there's points, or origin points. And when you take, and it's kind of like everything that exists is kind of like a big mother and father, or like a dimension that kind of creates the creator. And we are taking and taking and taking. The company that's putting it in bottles is being paid, but there's no spiritual payment, no reciprocity with the mother and father of the water or whatever, the origin point. There's no spiritual payments, and so at some point it disbalances everything, so that then it dries up, and then there's droughts in the whole ecosystem. So even when we talk about like climate change, they're seeing a layer of it which are very clear. It's not like there's like, okay, we need to do this, we need to go to this point, we need to do that. We need to restore this part of our ecosystem of the Sierra Nevada, of the Linea Negra, which is the energetic points that are connected with the whole world. It's like they're very clear what needs to happen, but nobody is saying, okay, we're dealing with a climate crisis. Let's sit together and tell us what you're seeing and and this is the problem. This is the hegemony of knowledge. We have the knowledge, and these are all beliefs that just don't make sense because
the Western science doesn't believe in this energetic point, and
it's the fracture between spirituality and science, and indigenous spirituality is life science. Period.
But so when you see the Nobel Prize from Physics in 2022 given to this phenomenon of the quantum entanglement, right?
Yeah.
On the subatomic level, two particles at extreme distance behave in a certain way if you look at them in a certain way. So that's proof that there is not something like a local objective reality. So maybe that's a step in the right direction.
Totally. I don't know if you know Paul Levy and his book, The Wetiko and the Dispelling of Evil. He really got into quantum physics, and he says it's a bit like the holy grail of the moment, or in our science. It's breaking through this more the paradigm, dualistic paradigm that we had, and it points to I think the way kind of ancestral knowledge sees life. One of the things that he says, which is fascinating, is the Wetiko, the evil. It's a concept that came from a Native American tribe, and they said it's kind of like a mind virus. It basically says evil doesn't exist; it only exists in the mind. But obviously, our life is a big paradox. So because it exists in the mind, we are the source of it. And I asked the Mama at some point, like, what is the source of life for you? And he said, our thought. So kind of when we, it brings back to the pruebas. What if everything that happens in the world is, that is difficult and that we feel should not happen is a prueba? It's a test. That is a catalyst for change. For the evolution of life, that it's all part of the evolution of life. The more you kind of resist, the more you see this as evil, they're attacking me, the more you might become a source of attack and evil. And maybe we're kind of stuck in this, loop. In the Wetiko mind. But so the healing is in a way in the mind, but not in the type of mind that we think of in our system of mental health. But it's the entanglement of everything, the fact that everything is integrated. Our ontology, the way we see ourselves is exactly the same as the way we see the other and the world. The moment that you tell yourself there's something wrong about me, you actually say, well, and so that means there is something wrong about life, and then you start looking for who's responsible and what you need to fix and change. it is not separate, but in our healing systems, our medicine systems, they are all separated. So over this last year, we came together with, there's with Umiak, River Styx, Dr. Bronner, the different indigenous organizations, the Indigenous Spirit Conservation Initiative, kind of out of all of these relationships, there was the need during the pandemic that came up. And these were some spiritual leaders that really asked for this, to set up a fund, an indigenous-led fund, and be established that so that the philanthropy, that kind of the psychedelic space would engage in support, get behind the processes of indigenous people, not in the classical philanthropy way where it's like indigenous peoples are beneficiaries of support. No, they're actually sitting on the table, they're deciding, and the processes are led they come from the territories and the communities, not kind of from outside. And so we've been setting this up, in this over this last year, and I'm serving also currently as the interim co-director until there's indigenous direction, but it's indigenous led. We have indigenous leaders, in the decision-making positions. I'm kind of more of a facilitator, but that's something that gives me great hope. This is like really, if we all get that our priority is with all of the capital that's being generated in the psychedelic space, like imagine that there's large capital going into these communities, but in a good way. We are saying, this is for the repair of your nations, for restorative justice, for bioculture conservation, on your terms, the way you see is needed, led by the spiritual leaders. And we don't want anything in return for it. We do it because we know this is what we need to do if we are a healing movement. What is going to come out of that is really, that is for me really the revolution in mental health that we're looking for, because that is what's going to allow for right relationship. So it's a vehicle for right relationships. It's more than funding from one side to the other, but it's kind of then it's really opening people's minds as well to some of the perspectives that we need to have if we really want to be a healing movement, and facilitating right relationship, but under the indigenous leadership. So it's a bit, there's now kind of, it seems like there's a movement starting in philanthropy of indigenous led funds, and this is what we're figuring out, and that's fascinating. But that's really, and then how do we behave in right relationship for the industry? What is that gonna look like? That's something to figure out now, not when it's all done. So that's very much of my focus right now. A lot of my time goes to that as well, and hoping we can fully establish over the next year.
Amazing. No, I totally understand the importance of that. It's like the FDA should. When it gives license for a substance with a cultural background to become a medicine, like a certain percentage of the profit should go back to as a cultural restoration.
Yeah, and then like we want. So this is the right relationship means informed consent with everything that has to do with their medicines. But then also, like, for example, psilocybin was, this is already, 60 years ago that this was kind of extracted out of the communities in Mexico. Now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, or already it's kind of happening. So kind of that extraction happened 60 years ago. So then it's like, okay, but we're going to do benefit sharing, because that happened without any informed consent. That we now are going to benefit economically about it. Like we cannot, say, these people are poor. Their community, their territories invaded. Like that cannot happen if we don't deal with that. If that's not our priority, then like how can we say we're a healing movement? Well, a healing movement for some people,
for a specific symptom.
That's and that's colonialism fully in action. So we're kind of working to make people aware, and but also like there's many people I think who say, okay, we want to, engage and do benefit sharing, do reparation, but how do we do that in a way that doesn't further disrupt? No, so this is kind of the infrastructure that we are building to allow for that to happen, and in the process, then the relationships that are going to be established are, is what I think is going to lead us to the next milestone in the psychedelic renaissance, which is understanding that maybe it's not the renaissance of the psychedelics, but really the renaissance of our way of life. And that only can come when we truly come together, for our knowledges to come together, and where ancestral knowledge leads technology and modern kind of knowledge, because that's really how it becomes rooted in life, in the order of life, instead of disrupting it. That's really what I see, is the next, like we cannot say this milestone is our endpoint. We're done it. Let's now think always about what's the next substance we're going to drug develop. No, we need to think about what is really what we have signed up for.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much. One thing that comes to mind is recently there was, are you familiar with the Harvard well-being experiment? It's the longest experiment on happiness. It started in 1938. And now this is the fourth generation of Harvard doctor that's been following this. At the beginning, there were like 400 people. Now there's becoming 3,000 with all the son and grandson. And now the fourth generation doctor who's following this study has been on both Sam Harris and Chris Williamson podcast. And at the end, out of 100 years almost study, the one thing that has consistently been associated with happiness is the quality of your relationship.
Yeah.
Is, to what extent you are connected with other.
Yeah.
And so, we know that this indigenous understanding of the territory and community has been part of who we are, has been eroded by the radical individualism.
Yeah.
Where, you go through life with the guard up and always scared that living with the fear of scarcity.
Yeah. This is also maybe like in terms of risk factors for people who are going to have a psychedelic experience. Those who are very disintegrated from social relations, I think have the highest chance to afterwards be in a very difficult place and don't know what to do. Yeah, and I think it's totally right. I would add, this from kind of more what I've learned. It's about relationship with others, but it's really also about the relationship with the territory and life itself. Because happiness, that's what the way I understand it, is not about being in the state of bliss the whole time. It's about, no matter what happens, to always be able to find meaning in life. That it's not what was not supposed to happen, and then you start fighting it and judge life and yourself and others and so forth. Know that you can deal with it in a way which it doesn't break down the meaning of life. And that's I think what really happiness is about. It's about navigating life. It's holding life sacred no matter what happens, and that's very difficult to do if you suffer. I can only imagine some of the suffering that's going on right now.
Amazing. We've been a bit longer than usual, but this has been a very, very interesting and very important conversation.
Yeah.
And so for people that want to help you, I'm sure many people would resonate in trying to help the indigenous tribe that brought this knowledge that we're not recognizing. So you mentioned, okay, first of all, if people wants to help, what should they do? First, I see ears.
Well, if you want to help indigenous people get what they need, it's the IMC fund, the Indigenous Medicine Conservation Fund, is where it's happening, and we are investing our time and collaboration. This was really built on years of relationship building.
What's the website of that?
It's imc.fund, so people can go there. And then ICEERS has been an organization engaging with the challenge of this globalization and wanting to move forward. It's very much of service of the community of plant medicine, trying to self-regulate, change policies, work at the UN. That's kind of the type of organization that ICEERS is. It's really trying to be in this place in between all of these systems and kind of make sense of them and look at how can we move forward in a good way. We need support for that work. ICEERS.org is our website. So that's kind of how people can support our work at ICEERS as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Benjamin. I know you for so many years now, and I must admit I'm really impressed by your constant evolution and your deep interest in understanding, this culture and this medicine. And it seems that, you really have now put the finger on something really important, which can be, really life-changing in understanding our reality and our space in it, So thank you. And we'd love to invite you another time to come and confess confess with us your psychedelic experience.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're going to do that soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Koka sunarai sunarayente. 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 Koka sunarai sunarayente.